It's very rare in Hollywood to find successful filmmakers who have turned down a lucrative project to protect the integrity of their work, and Spielberg is one of those rare ones. The Oscar-winning auteur, Steven Spielberg, has always been vocal about his disdain towards Hollywood's long-standing obsession with remakes and sequels. The freedom of creativity is the highest priority for the visionary, not the numbers at the box office, thus defying all the old Hollywood norms. He stood apart from the crowd. One of his early works, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, released in 1982, not only stole the show, but also set an example of how a film can be deeply personal to its maker. Despite having great potential to become a full-fledged franchise, E.T. remained a standalone masterpiece. However, having a big studio like Universal Pictures' name attached to it, how did it stay a self-contained feature? Was it easy for Spielberg to fight for his rights against the studio? In today's video, we're going to talk about how E.T. remained a non-franchise, even though a sequel was already planned for the project. So, without further ado, let's dig in. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. E.T. followed the story of a little boy, Elliot, played by Henry Thomas, who discovered a weird alien creature in the backyard of his house. He named him E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial, who was stranded on Earth after his spaceship mistakenly abandoned him in the forest. With the help of Elliot and his siblings, Michael and Gertie, E.T. managed to establish communication with his home planet through a speak-and-spell machine. But scientists and investigators stood in his way. In his constant effort to communicate with his home, E.T. fell into a river and was almost dead. But Elliot's unending love for him brought him back to life. E.T. returned home, bidding a final goodbye to Elliot. Spielberg's initial outline for E.T.'s story was largely inspired by his own childhood imaginary friends, which was an interesting arc for a science fiction story. However, with the touch of the screenwriter Melissa Matheson, it became an extraordinary project. The box office phenomenon, why studios wanted a sequel. In June 1982, when E.T. was released in the United States, it made history by becoming the highest-grossing film of all time, even surpassing the box office records of 1977 Star Wars. Garnering a huge critical acclaim, as well as commercial success, it became the most culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant film, according to the National Film Registry of the United States. After a preview in Houston, Texas, E.T. premiered for the first time at the 1982 Cannes Film Festival, receiving widespread attention from international critics. Critics like Roger Ebert observed how a science fiction film could emotionally impact a film festival audience, who'd seen many movies but were still emotionally invested in this, unable to hold back their tears. He also remembered how the iconic bicycle scene was so astonishing that the audience seated in the hall also felt the same excitement as Elliot. A huge commercial breakthrough awaited the movie. Upon its release, the film earned $11 million just in its first weekend and remained at number one for 16 weeks straight. Soon enough, people began to get obsessed with the film, creating the official E.T. fan club, or making E.T. dolls a merchandise icon of that time. By September 1982, it's claimed that E.T. dolls had already sold approximately 10 to 15 million units, making it one of the best-selling toys of that time. During the Christmas season, it became the most popular gift choice for children. Although a children's fantasy film on the surface, E.T. became the most influential science fiction story of all time, with a rating of 9.2 out of 10 on Rotten Tomatoes, based on a total of 146 reviews. This rating is based on current aggregation, not from 1982. With a total of 9 Academy Award nominations, it won 4 Oscars for Best Original Score, Best Visual Effects, Best Sound, and Best Sound Editing, as well as 5 Saturn Awards and 2 Golden Globes, elevating Spielberg to the height of his fame. The film was released in 1985, as well as in 2002, on the occasion of its 20th anniversary celebration. In 2022, the film celebrated its 40th anniversary with a re-release on IMAX screens. Regarded as Universal Studios' 15th highest-grossing film and one of the top 3 North American movies, E.T. was a huge revenue generator that big studios wanted to turn into a franchise. And therefore, Spielberg and Melissa Matheson realized the imminent pressure on them to create a sequel to this film. The lost sequel, E.T. 2, Nocturnal Fears. Let alone a sequel, Spielberg never even expected the film would be such a smash hit, but a continuation was already in demand right after its theatrical release. While the film was running in theaters, Spielberg and Matheson had already outlined a primary idea for a sequel. naming it E.T. 2, The Nocturnal Fears. The sequel, which is mostly speculative, was supposed to follow extraterrestrial carnivorous creatures, an albino version of the same species that E.T. was. However, unlike E.T., these mutated creatures are unfriendly and monstrous, with red eyes and fangs bared, and they came to Earth to look for one of the stranded members of their civilization. Elliot and his siblings got to know about their arrival with the help of the home phone machine that E.T. had built. As the children went to the forest to meet their dearest friend, they were captured by these evil aliens. Now, Elliot's mother Mary, her lover, and the government investigator Keyes teamed up with E.T. itself to locate Elliot and save the siblings from those carnivorous creatures. Apparently, these events followed by E.T.'s departure in the original film could have made a great franchise opening. People love to see child actors grow up in sequels, with realistic character development, and that's why popular franchises like Harry Potter or Stranger Things have made their mark in the industry. Similarly, E.T. could have done the same thing in its sequels, where children would grow up to find a world fraught with many complexities and dangers, and learn the truth about how dreams don't always come true. Also, unlike 1982's E.T., this sequel wouldn't have dealt with the good part only, but also showed how good and evil coexist in the world, constantly battling with each other. Initially, Spielberg and Matheson thought this sequel could be an important part of the story, where, as makers, they could have explored the darker themes more than they had in the original film. That's why an initial outline with such a promising title became one of the most precious projects for the studio. But Spielberg eventually decided not to continue with the sequel. Yes, this time Universal Studios wasn't to blame, as our beloved director, Steven Spielberg, didn't want to make a continuation of E.T. to protect the legacy and purity of the original film. Spielberg draws the line, why he said no. According to Steven Spielberg, making a sequel to anything is a cheap and carny trick, as mentioned in Steven Spielberg, the unauthorized biography by John Baxter. And then this man went on to make sequels to Indiana Jones and Jurassic Park, proving the fact that filmmakers have to deal with studio pressures and the expectations from the audience, which robbed them of their creative freedom and choice. Anyway, Spielberg didn't let that happen to E.T., because as one of the earliest films of his career, it brought him worldwide recognition, even before he made Indiana Jones or Jurassic Park. Moreover, E.T. came to him as a result of his own personal journey. Growing up, his parents' separation made him feel isolated and abandoned, causing him to create his own imaginary world with imaginary friends to escape the loneliness. The reflection of his childhood is evident in E.T.'s protagonist, Elliot, who grew up in a similar environment to Spielberg's. So, it was quite natural that he didn't want to create a franchise out of a story inspired by his own life. Moreover, he sincerely believed and remarked in his interviews that making a sequel would also rob the original of its virginity, as people would only remember the latest version of the story, and the original would slowly fade away. In 1985, William Kotzwinkle's book E.T., The Book of the Green Planet, a new novel, was published, reimagining the world from where E.T. came. While Spielberg sought to come up with something for the sequel, he was reminded of this book, which he believed told a nice story about humans visiting E.T.'s home. However, it wasn't suitable for a film adaptation, as he emphasized. Sadly, after Melissa Matheson died in 2015, Spielberg made it officially clear to everyone that a sequel to E.T. would never be possible without Melissa's cinematic brilliance. Spielberg began to develop animosity towards the idea of sequels, which ultimately led to the cancellation of sequels to Jaws, Jurassic Park 3, and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. The rights battle, stopping a sequel from happening. When Universal Pictures bought the script and rights for E.T., Spielberg did have some rights over his IP, but he lacked the most crucial part of it, the freeze. It helps directors and writers prevent the studio from making any further sequels or prequels of their films. Still, initially, Spielberg couldn't afford that clause because, despite delivering some blockbusters like Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he was still at the beginning of his career, especially during the 1970s to the early 1980s. Studios used to retain ownership over the IPs, preventing the makers from getting long-term authorship over their projects. They used to secure the maximum amount of the box office profit without asking for approval from the makers. Therefore, it was evident that Spielberg and Matheson wrote the sequels just out of sheer pressure from the industry and waited until the film made wonders at the box office. Eventually, the film's huge commercial success allowed Spielberg to acquire the rights to his IP. Therefore, despite Universal Pictures owning E.T.'s rights, the studio ultimately failed to assign any other directors to make a sequel or an entire franchise out of Spielberg's original work. This was a huge triumph for the filmmaker, even more significant than E.T.'s box office success. Steven Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy co-founded their own production house, Amblin Entertainment, which had the iconic bicycle scene of E.T. as its logo, and later founded DreamWorks to protect their future blockbuster IPs, like Jurassic Park and Indiana Jones. which have always demanded sequels and prequels. Although Spielberg didn't continue making these sequels, he produced the films while also making sure that the continuation was necessary. These platforms became Spielberg's safe space, where he could properly manage the production and distribution of his movies without having to worry about big studios poking their noses into his business. The cast and crew perspective. Why even the stars said no. The lead cast members, Henry Thomas and Drew Barrymore, also supported Spielberg's decision not to make a sequel to E.T. In 2022, Henry Thomas expressed his thoughts on the sequel, saying that a feature-length continuation was not really needed. However, due to its uncanny box office triumph, big studios were kind of salivating over this project, hoping to make a fortune out of the franchise if it were ever made, while Thomas raised some major concerns about show business and how the industry was capable of ruining a classic just for some profit. Drew Barrymore went down memory lane in a discussion with Spielberg during a TCM Classic Film Festival in New York. She recalled those good old days on set when she used to think E.T. was real. Thanks to Spielberg's masterful direction technique, the kids were able to blend with the world of E.T. and bring out their natural performances on set. And that's why, for Barrymore and obviously for other cast members who were kids back then, E.T. wasn't just a film, but a life-changing experience that cannot be remade. She could remember that she was an 8-year-old when Spielberg decided not to make a sequel to the film, although it was quite surprising and heartbreaking for little Drew at the time. She later understood the gravity of his decision, with which she totally agreed. She also emphasized how a sequel or full-fledged franchise on E.T. could have faced numerous comparisons that would dilute the essence of the original film. She's forever grateful to the master filmmaker because, on the set of E.T., he wasn't just a director, but a father figure to the actress, who felt at home during the filming. The afterlife. Why nocturnal fears became a cult myth. Not only is E.T.'s influence on Hollywood impeccable, but the absence of a potential franchise also made a huge impact on next-generation filmmakers, as well as the audience. E.T. itself became a famous mythology in cinematic history, inspiring generations of cinephiles. Fans came up with endless speculations, especially when E.T.'s sequel, The Nocturnal Fears, was trending news all over the media, building anticipation for its further plot developments. Many theorists came up with what-if scenarios, particularly regarding E.T.'s resurrection process in the film's concluding part. All of these discussions are still pretty much relevant in documentaries, interviews, podcasts, and other talks about pop culture phenomena. Finally, to the fans' delight, in 2019, E.T. made a comeback through a famous commercial titled A Holiday Reunion, starring Henry Thomas and his reunion with his cute little alien friend. An American telecommunications provider named Xfinity released a 4-minute commercial film featuring an adult Elliot, who now spends his Christmas with his family, when one night, E.T. surprised him and his family with an unexpected return. Apparently, decades later, E.T. came back to Earth to pay a visit to his old friend. The short film premiered for the first time during the 93rd Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade on NBC's broadcast, where it quickly won many hearts. Directed by Lance Accord, the commercial managed to evoke strong nostalgia within a short span of time by using John Williams' famous background score, especially the flute part, that could take you back to your childhood times, when you too used to think E.T. was real. To keep that exact same feeling for both the audience and the cast members, Accord used a practical puppet for E.T. to pay homage to Spielberg's master celebration. The commercial quickly garnered a lot of attention and praise from both cinephiles and regular fans. But Henry Thomas pointed out some really important issues. He saw the initial storyboards of the commercial and mentioned how, with evolved technology, it lost its purity and innocence, which is fine for a short adaptation in a commercial form, but the same wouldn't have worked for a film. That's why Spielberg's ultimate decision to prevent a sequel from happening truly makes him a visionary artist. Marvelous verdict. E.T.'s contribution to Hollywood's new age science fiction genre was unparalleled, as no matter what advanced technologies have been introduced into the cinematic film, people always go back to the nostalgia evoked by this film. In the late 1980s, many films, like Back to the Future, Stand By Me, Arrival, as well as the Netflix series Stranger Things, were hugely inspired by E.T. Perhaps further sequels would have diluted the experience, or they would have simply made the story more relevant, just like popular franchises like Alien and Jurassic Park are still widely discussed topics all over the internet. On that note, this video is over. If you've liked the content, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts on E.T.'s sequel that was never made. Until then, goodbye, and see you in the next one.